Hi everyone, I am Heather, and I want to welcome you to Magnificent Authors Podcast, brought to you by Magnificent Mamas. This is the show where we'll celebrate the magic of storytelling and the power of words. I'm your host, Heather, and each week I'll be sitting down with incredible authors from all walks of life to explore their creative journeys, uncover their writing secrets, and delve into worlds they create. Whether you are an aspiring writer, a passionate reader, or simply curious about the minds behind your favorite books, this is the podcast for you. So grab a cozy blanket, pour yourself a cup of tea, and get ready to be inspired by the magnificent authors who join us. Let's dive in. Hi everyone, I am Heather with Magnificent Mamas and Magnificent Authors Podcast. We're joined here today with author James Fickling, is that right?
That's right.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Would you like to tell us a little about yourself?
Yes, I go by J.M. Fickling as my author name, but that's just my initials, so James works too. Let's see, I don't have much of anything in the way of schooling. I was a father at the age of 19, and I've got two children now, 10 years apart. So I've been a dad most of my life, basically. And with that, I needed a steady job, something that I could come home and see the kids every day. So I've worked grocery retail for over 20 years now. But I've always been a very creative person, and retail isn't really a space that's conducive to creativity.
No, it is not.
So for years and years and years, I pursued the visual arts, as you can see back here. I've got hundreds of paintings all over the house, but I really got burnt out with that. And I had an idea in my head for a book, but the thought of writing it was so daunting. But at last, the desperation caught up, and I just started writing. So after I published my first book, it's kind of been off to the races. I haven't looked back since. So the paintbrush is laying down for the meantime, but the typewriter's smoking. So
I noticed when we first started talking the artwork behind you, and I was curious about it, but I didn't ask yet. But I like it. It's very unique. So I understand.
Thanks. That's what I go for.
It's nice, especially I guess it would be the one on your right side with the blue down, that one. I really like that one.
Yeah, that's called a motor room. That's from I call it liminal abstract. I don't know if you're familiar with liminal spaces.
A little bit.
But it's basically the impression in the back of a grocery store, you'll have a motor room with lots of equipment and stuff that runs all the refrigeration. And that's the vibe you get from it. It's kind of like this steel cutout with like the light from a catwalk shining onto it. So I like to capture little things that, often go unseen, but once you stop to look, you see a lot around you. So.
Definitely. I've done that with photography, so I totally get that.
Oh, I respect photographers. That's one thing I do not have an eye for.
Yeah.
I admire photography.
Definitely. I know I used to, when I lived in Kansas City, go into the city and take pictures of stuff normally not seen, like you suggested, and just little in-depth moments, and it was really cool. My pictures were great. What would you say your writing process is like?
My writing process, I've got a bunch of friends who are authors. And my writing process drives them up the wall because I don't make notes or anything. I've got a process I use, which is I will know the beginning of a story and I'll know the ending. And if I know those two things, I'll sit down and write the beginning, knowing where it's going to end. But I let that process in the middle play out naturally. And I've found that's the best way to avoid plot holes, errors in the character dialogue, things like that. Basically, I'm hearing the story for the first time as I write it. And I think that has really helped in the sense that writing doesn't become a chore at that point. If I already know everything I want to write down, I'm left with that process of actually doing it, and it kills my motivation. But if I can just get the first paragraph written, and if I can know what the last page is going to be, I have a blast doing it. And so all my books are written in that style.
So you're definitely a pantser, not a planner, so to speak, the way typically, outlining and whatnot. I could never do that.
I am an agent of chaos. Put it that way.
Nice.
I've tried making plans before. It's just not the way my mind works. I gotta think on my feet, so to speak.
Oh yeah, definitely. I had a character when I was writing one of my stories where she was supposed to be the villain, be the bad guy, that type of thing. And she just kind of went off on her own and changed my story completely. It was pretty funny. I wasn't expecting that at all.
Oh yeah, that's my favorite part, is when the characters that I'm writing surprise me. And I have to wrap my brain around that. I'm writing this. How am I surprising myself? And that's just part of the joy of it. I really enjoy that part of the process.
Yeah, that part is really awesome. Are you working on anything now?
I am working on 2 standalone projects, and then I'm working on the second entry in a trilogy. And because of the way I operate, I wrote the first part of the trilogy last. So, well, no, I wrote the last part first, the first part second, and then the middle is going to be the third put together. But the way that the stories are written, it wouldn't matter what order you read them in.
Yep.
They're all part of one big story that kind of connects. So no matter at what point you start in the story, it will all come back to where you started eventually. Which has been
what I'm doing with.
Oh yeah, you can go ahead.
I was just gonna say that's what I'm doing with my series. It's all standalone, but
yes,
you see connecting characters and events and whatnot from different views. So
excellent.
I love
Yeah,
books
what
like
I'm
that.
doing is very similar, except for the 2 standalone pieces I have in the works right now. They are entirely their own animals, so they're going to be just standalone works. Hoping to get them up to around 300 pages each, but we'll see. That's all. If the stories, I will not make something longer just to make it longer. If the story fits in a shorter format, that's what I'm going to go with. If it needs to be longer, it will be. That was a lesson I learned pretty early on.
Yeah. What would you say your word count typically is? Do you know, or?
My first one was at about 80,000. Then this year in 2024, I wrote 5 that were much shorter in length. They were about, I'd say, 120 pages. I'm not sure on the exact word count, but much
So
shorter.
Kind of like a novella.
Yes, like a novella. And then I took those 5 novellas and compiled them into one hardcover edition. So the individual stories there are, if people want to read them, and they can be read as standalones.
Yeah.
But the people who read 2 or more, I've noticed, they start flipping out because they're like, oh, I learned about this in this other book, or this connects here and this connects there, and it gets them on, which is really what I wanted to go for. I guess I want to make reading fun for people. I want to make it.
I was just about to ask you that.
Yeah. That's my main drive, is to make it fun. And a lot of that comes from when I was in grade school. I kind of went off on the bookworm tangent. I was big into dinosaurs. Jurassic Park hit theaters. It was massive.
Oh yeah.
And I loved it so much that I found out there was a book. And that got me into Michael Crichton. And in 6th and 7th and 8th grade, I read through all of Michael Crichton's work. And I just got hooked on it. Like, the stories were great. I loved his way with prose. He could get a bit technical and preachy at times, but he was a doctor first and an author second, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
But his work really stuck with me because it was fun. I was having fun reading his stuff. So
I read some of his stuff and it's good, but I didn't know there was a book for Jurassic Park.
Oh, yes. There's one for Jurassic Park and one for Lost World. Both of them I highly recommend. Very good. They're very good.
Better than the movie?
Man, normally I would say yes. That would be the knee-jerk response is yes. But I think Spielberg did an incredible job taking what was in the book and putting it on screen. There are some things that are missing and there are differences within the characters, but I'm glad Spielberg kind of took his own artistic license with it. I recommend both the book and the movie. It's basically two different tellings of the same story with the same bones, but both are rewarding experiences in terms of entertainment.
I'll definitely have to check it out for sure.
Mm-hmm.
You already answered about what do you hope readers take away, and it's nice to see.
I can go further on that one if you want. I wanted to make reading fun, but there's always a point to every story I write, and that point is to get people thinking. Let's say that there's subjects that we know. Let's go right off the deep end and go heavy with it. The subject of death. That's something that everyone's going to have to deal with eventually in their lifetime. It's something that we don't like to talk about. And the things that we don't like to talk about are always the things that we're the least prepared for. So I play on themes of, I guess the easiest way to put it is suffering and hope. It's through suffering that in almost any story, your main character will have a character arc. Suffering is kind of the additive that gets that process going. And you have a world that you build, which is the anvil that you forge that character on. So I always have characters that are thrust into impossible situations and then somehow, some way find a way out of it, kind of like Houdini, but through trial and error, through errors and mistakes, because that's what we all deal with. All of us walking around this world right now are facing the hardest battle we'll ever face. And yours is different from mine. Mine's different from the guy down the street. I just want to wake people up to that, because I've found that the more aware you are of that, the better things will go in your life, with your relationships, with people around you, strangers. I think it was Bruce Lee who said that every person you meet is fighting the hardest battle of their life. And that one stuck with me. So I like to write stories that deal with that.
What type of genres and tropes would you say you cover in your books?
I didn't know how to classify my work at first, but through hearing from other people, the best way to classify it is I write sci-fi and psychological thrillers. I took a lot of inspiration from the Twilight Zone, the original episodes from the 50s and 60s. The writing was phenomenal. I could sit down and watch them to this day, even if I know the ending and how they play out. I love watching the mechanics of the different characters, and each episode was its own little world. But each episode definitely has the fingerprints of the Twilight Zone all over it, and that's my work is very similar in that way. I took a lot of inspiration from Twilight Zone, Black Mirror, authors like Michael Crichton, of course, and then several classical authors I read growing up who left an impact. So,
who are your favorite authors besides Michael Crichton?
Ooh, let's see. Joseph Heller, who wrote Catch-22. One of my standalone projects, which is a social satire, I took a lot of inspiration from Catch-22 and Joseph Heller on that one. Remark for All Quiet on the Western Front. I really love that one because it took a topic which is glamorized in our media, which is war, and stripped all of the glory out of it. And it showed you the reality of what that is. And my other standalone book is based off of that. So that's funny because, yeah, now that I think about it, like the books that inspired me the most are pushing me in that direction.
Out of your books, what's your favorite book?
Oh, man. It's like asking me to pick my favorite child. I would say My personal favorite is my first, this one, Howler and Prime. It's the first one I wrote. Took me 3 years to write. And that was the hardest one because I'd never written a book before. I'd written a short story a few times. I used to write all kinds of little stories, but the patience to sit down and write something of that size was just that took 3 years, laying it off, coming back to it, laying it off, coming back to it. But rereading it now, it's got a lot of my core philosophies come out in the book. It was the story I always wanted to read. That's why I wrote it. So I actually wrote my first book for me, and I wanted it in a tangible form where I can hold it instead of a computer screen. And that it's dear to me for that very reason. It's the story I always wanted to read. So.
That's awesome. I think, there's a lot of writers that go into it thinking they're going to just become, bestsellers and whatnot. But I think the really good writers out there are the ones that just want to get their story out there, just want to have an impact on somebody's life, on their interests, on their feelings, on their beliefs, make them aware of something. And those are the great writers.
Yeah. Well, full disclosure, I wouldn't mind being a best-selling author.
I mean, I think everyone would love that, but
yeah, I don't want to lay it off like I'm pure as the driven snow. I definitely have other motivations. So.
Yeah. I talked to this guy once, and he was like, well, I published my book on Amazon. Why am I not a bestseller? It takes a little more than that, and you got to write a best-selling book, which
I will admit I can't criticize the guy because I was thinking the same thing when it was coming time to publish my first. And my daughter now is on the way to publishing her first book. She just finished writing it last night.
Congrats.
But when it was nearing the publishing, I was like, oh, I'm about to make it big. I was thinking, oh, man, I tell you what, I've learned that writing, being an author, an independent author especially, is 1/3 writing and 2/3 marketing. That's the truth of it. But
definitely,
I will say that part of it has become very fun. I'm starting to have a lot of fun with that. I started up a TikTok channel to advertise them, and I started having as much fun doing that as I do with the writing. I guess you could say I'm starting to embrace like the full scope of what it means to be an author. Like all the different moving parts that are required. Now that I've got 2.5 years experience of dealing with the process, now it's starting to become fun. And so that's become a fun part.
That's awesome. And it's such a learning process, especially for indie authors.
Oh yeah. There's no one out there that will give you a straight
everything.
answer. No one out there will give you a straight answer. When you tell them, how do I publish a book? You'll never get a straight answer to that question. And that was the most frustrating part of the entire process. I was going to ask
you what the hardest part was.
That was the hardest part was, and I don't want to turn people off to wanting to publish books. But there's people in my life who were wanting to become authors themselves. And I told them, I said, when you get there and you want to know how to publish, call me. I'll tell you from the ground up how to do it, because I wouldn't wish that process on anybody. It was so frustrating. And I think there's 100 people around every bush and street corner wanting to take advantage of you. That's a hard truth that you learn. But if you stick with it and you start to kind of develop those like street smarts around the process, it gets a lot more bearable.
I think the part that I am not looking forward to is the formatting for it.
Yeah, that's a pain. I ain't gonna lie, that can be a pain unless you do what I did and stop caring about that. And that's exactly I took a lot of inspiration from Cormac McCarthy. I'm not sure if you've read any of his works. He did.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, he wrote The Road. They made that into a film with Viggo Mortensen. And then he also wrote Blood Meridian. I think Blood Meridian is the one he's most renowned for. But he'll take an entire page, like 2 paragraphs, and put no punctuation in it. And
Oh
then some
no.
chapters he'll write a paragraph and just be like, okay, done, and go on to the next chapter. I love that. I love that. The first time I read one of his books, I was just spellbound with that, because he stepped outside of the wizard circle, or that rigorous matrix of expectations. You got to have your grammar looking this way. You got to have this word spelled this way. It needs to be this far from the margins. And he threw all that out the window, and he cared about it so little that it was good. And that held me back from beginning with Halloran Prime. My first book was, I was like, I don't know how to do the formatting or any of this. And that was a roadblock. And I would tell people, don't worry about it. If you've got an idea in your head, write it. Don't worry about the spelling, punctuation, grammar, format. Get that out of your head. It's the words on the page that are important. And as long as you can get that down, the rest of it really sorts itself out. Like a lot of my readers are accomplished authors themselves who really go heavy on format and, the way things are supposed to be. And I haven't heard any complaints from them about my writing style. In fact, a lot of them have found it to be kind of refreshing, kind of like loosen your shirt collar, relax, that kind of deal, which is the vibe I want to go for with a lot of things. So I would say that can be daunting, but don't let it be.
Definitely. I know I'm not to that point yet on any of my stuff, but it's something I'm already thinking about, formatting and whatnot.
Well,
Go ahead.
Oh, no, you're fine. Go ahead.
I was just gonna ask, what kind of hobbies and interests do you have outside of writing?
That's a very bizarre list. Painting, of course. I like to build masks, like Halloween and carnival masks. I did a lot of ministry with the homeless in my area. Let me see, I got a big heart. I can't stand to watch people suffer. I did a lot of study on the King James Bible. I've read it through about 3 times. It's just a fascinating book. Just the prose and the use of the words. I love it. A lot of that went into Halloran Prime. It was a big influence, just the syntax. The one that really sticks out like a sore thumb is downhill longboarding. I like to get on skateboards and go down very steep highways and roads on a skateboard. It doesn't make sense. Like, I'm the type of person, if I see someone rock climbing, I'm like, that's stupid. Why would you do that? Just play chicken with a train. And then I'll go and do that and see nothing wrong with it. And so if I'm hypocrite about one thing, it's riding skateboards down. So.
Yeah, I don't think I could do that. I'm too much of a scaredy cat.
Yep. And there's times when I'm doing it that I'm a scaredy cat also, but I don't have much options but to stay on the board. So.
Yeah, definitely. So, do you want to tell us a little bit more about your books more in depth without giving away spoilers?
Yeah, sure. In fact, let's see. The ones I wrote this year would be the ones I would start people with, but I wrote 5 of them.
That's awesome.
This one right here, Minotaur, this is the most popular by far.
I saw that.
People love this. It's about the back rooms, which was some internet lore that sprung up a few years back. It was written by an anonymous user. He had a 1-paragraph quote and that picture. And that's all that there was to it. And it was laying out the premise of this huge labyrinth, 600 million square miles of empty office space. And I thought, man, that's cool. But since it was open to the public, what happened was kind of a tragedy of the commons. And so people started making content about the back rooms, but they were adding in things like, oh, there's almond water that you can get to survive on, and there's multiple levels. But I got to looking at it at just the quote. And if you look at just the quote itself, you have one of the scariest setups for a book imaginable. And so I just stuck with that quote as hard as I could. And the result surprised me but I was very happy with it. Other ones, I got the SCP Foundation. That was big internet lore. I'm big with it. This one's popular in England. This
Really?
one sells in the UK like crazy. I can't figure. Maybe they just love that kind of stuff over there. But I've got all kinds of different deep sea thriller, apocalyptic cowboys, post-apocalyptic cowboys. That's fun.
That's
The Coyote
awesome.
Brothers, and then Horatio, which has started growing on people. It's about a super soldier who gets paired with some kind of artificial intelligence, and they don't get along, which makes it fun. But I would say of all my books, the one to start out with, the one I recommend is this one, Dogs of Hope. That's all 5 of the books I showed you, but put in the order I wanted them read, or that I would choose to read them. And so this one, I've gotten a lot of good feedback on it when people can see that. So that's what I'm working.
Great.
Well, thank you. It's everything you see is all in house. I'm a one-man band, so
Nice.
Thank you, Amazon. The KDP program has been incredible. I love it. So
Definitely. KDP is awesome, especially for those that can't afford or don't want to go traditional or hybrid or anything like that. It's definitely a lot more popular now.
Oh yeah.
Okay, weird question, but if you had to write in any other genre than what you have written in, what would it be?
That is an excellent question. I would write romance.
Really?
Yes, because it would be a challenge. It would be a challenge.
So
it would
you're
be
all
challenging.
in for the challenge.
It would be challenging from the aspect that it's already a very established genre. And you can look at the romance section; it's all kind of, you know what you're getting.
Oh yeah.
I would choose romance because I would want to write the one that breaks the mold. And that would be what I set out to do. Whether it did or didn't, who knows, but I'd love to try.
That would be awesome. I forgot the name of the person, if they were a horror writer or a romance writer. But when I asked them that question, because that's one of my favorite ones to get the answer to, and they were one of those, and they said that they would do the opposite one, like romance, and they were a horror writer, and I was like, wow, that's a big transition.
You would think so, but I know 2 horror writers, and they are very good. They have an advantage in that they understand emotions, because to write good horror, you have to sell the emotions of the characters. With romance, you have to do the same thing. So I would take, when it comes to horror and romance, I would say that they are very close together in terms of authorship and the people who write those books. I don't think it would be that far of a leap. I'm certainly willing to find out.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. If you could sit down with any author, dead or alive, who would it be?
Ooh. The Pearl Poet. I'd want to sit down with whoever wrote Beowulf.
Okay. How come?
Mainly just for the novelty of picking a person's brain from that time period, I think. And because the Pearl Poet was so on the nose with the story of Beowulf. There's hardly any nuance or any subtlety in it. And it's still a good story. I've always imagined that author as someone who would be very blunt and very direct, with very little guile about their character at all. It's their writing style that makes me want to say, I'd like to meet this person. So when I read Beowulf, I would like to meet the author just to see who they were, what they were like.
Yeah. If you had a chance to co-author a book with any author, dead or alive, who would it be?
Wesley Crumb. He's a fellow independent author. I've read his books. He's read mine. I consider him a friend. But I know his writing style and I know my own. And I think that those two would dovetail rather nicely.
That's a very unique answer. A lot of people, they name somebody, a famous author throughout history, or, a current author that writes that's, popular.
Mhm.
And to see you choose an indie author is very exciting. Very awesome.
We are in the era, and maybe I got on this train a lot faster than other people, or a lot earlier. People are losing a lot of interest in what I call the mainstream realm of entertainment. Whether it's the distance between the rich and the poor, whether it's social causes or whatever, a lot of that pre-existing romance from like the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s is going away. I saw this happening about 3 or 4 years ago when I decided to start writing Halloran Prime, because I saw the next few years as being the golden opportunity for grassroots talent to start coming up. I've noticed a lot more people reaching out towards indie musicians, indie authors, indie movie. Is a big one to watch. They're starting to overtake Hollywood very, very fast. And I guess if I was to be cutthroat about it, I'd say I smelled blood in the water and decided to pounce. So.
That's awesome. If one of your books became a movie, who would you hope the actors or actresses would be?
Oh, man. Anthony Hopkins. I love Anthony Hopkins. I would love to have Anthony Hopkins play. I know exactly which character I'd have him play too. I'd like to see Christopher Walken. Yeah, those two come to mind.
Those are great actors too. That's makes me even more interested in your books.
Oh, Hopkins just gives me chills. I loved his portrayal of Hannibal Lecter. I thought that was that I used to watch horror. I grew up watching horror movies. Anthony Hopkins' character of Hannibal Lecter scared me. It scared me for years. I had trouble sleeping. I had trouble turning the lights off at night, wondering about it, because the character was unbelievable, but also kind of believable. And I was like,
definitely. Yeah. I'm the same way. I grew up watching horror, and, now it's like not very many things are scary to me on, the movies, except like the really realistic type things that you can see, that see happening. And it's so funny because there was, I don't know if you remember Tremors, but I remember watching it as a kid and being so afraid to touch the ground or anything.
It probably ruined the playground for you for what, about 4 or 5 years?
Oh yeah, definitely. I remember my babysitter, we had left her house to go back to my house on commercial from the movie, and like we jumped down from her couch, ran to my house, and jumped back up on the couch just because we were afraid of the ground. It was really funny.
Yep. Kind of like Jaws and the beach.
Oh yes. Jaws will always be a classic, I feel like.
Yep.
I do have to get ready to wrap up. Is there anything special you want to share about? Anything about your writing, events, that type of thing?
I guess I'd just like to tell people where they can find my books. All my books are exclusively on Amazon, except for Halloran Prime. My first one, you can find on Barnes & Noble on their online. But it's on Amazon under keyword JM Fickling. So just the name that's on the front of the book, you type that in the search bar, it brings up everything I got. So.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and end. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been awesome.
Oh, yeah, and thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
All right. Bye.
Bye. And that's a wrap on another episode of Magnificent Authors Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. It was a pleasure to share another inspiring conversation with a talented author. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe to Magnificent Authors Podcast so you don't miss any of our upcoming conversations with amazing writers. And be sure to check out Magnificent Mamas on our website, which is www.magnificentmamas.us, or on our Facebook page for more inspiring content from incredible authors. I'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode. What resonated with you the most? Head over to Facebook or leave a comment on our website and let me know. Until next time, keep reading, keep writing, and keep those imaginations soaring.